Tonight, we're going to step quietly into a medieval winter. Not the winter of fairy tales, with bright snow-covered castles and cheerful feasts glowing behind every window, but the real winter experienced by ordinary people many centuries ago. A winter that arrived slowly across fields and forests. A winter that darkened the afternoons, stiffened the earth, and tested every household's preparation. As you settle in and make yourself comfortable, imagine that the modern world is gradually drifting away. The hum of electricity fades, the glow of screens disappears, roads become muddy tracks, cities shrink into market towns, the night grows darker than most of us have ever known. Ahead of us lies a long season of cold winds, frozen streams, smoky hearths, woolen clothing, and careful planning. For medieval people, winter was never simply another season. It was a challenge that returned every year. Success depended on months of preparation. Food had to be stored, fuel had to be gathered, buildings had to be repaired, animals needed shelter. Communities depended on cooperation, memory, and experience passed from one generation to the next. Yet winter was not only hardship. It was also a season of stories, traditions, quiet work, family gatherings, religious celebrations, and moments of unexpected beauty. Snow softened the landscape. Fields rested beneath pale skies. The busy rhythms of harvest gave way to slower days spent indoors beside crackling fires. Tonight, we'll follow medieval people through the entire winter season. We will visit peasant cottages and manor houses. We will walk through villages buried beneath fresh snow. We will sit beside hearth fires and watch families prepare simple meals. We will travel along dangerous winter roads and spend long evenings listening to stories told in flickering candlelight. And as we move through these distant centuries, we'll discover how millions of ordinary people survived some of the coldest months of the year without central heating, electric lights, supermarkets, or modern medicine. So take a slow breath. Let your shoulders relax. And together, let's wander into the medieval winter. The first signs of winter often appeared long before the first snowfall. By late autumn, the countryside already felt different. Leaves had fallen from the trees. The harvest was mostly complete. Fields that had bustled with activity during summer now stood quiet beneath grey skis. The air carried a sharper edge, especially during the mornings. People paid close attention to these changes. In a world without weather forecasts, experience served as the best guide. Farmers watched birds, clouds, wind direction, and animal behavior. Older villagers remembered particularly severe winters and shared warnings with younger generations. The shortening daylight hours were impossible to ignore. Each week brought longer nights. Work that depended on sunlight became more difficult. The village day slowly contracted. Tasks that could be completed outdoors needed to be finished before conditions worsened. For many families, autumn represented the most important period of preparation. A poor harvest could mean serious hardship. A missed opportunity to gather firewood could create dangerous conditions later. Every household worked carefully to ensure survival through the coming months. Wood occupied a central role in winter preparation. In many regions, people spent weeks gathering fuel. Branches were collected from forests. Trees were cut where rights allowed. Brushwood was bundled and stored. Even small pieces of timber held value. A warm fire could mean the difference between comfort and misery. In poorer households, fuel shortages were common concerns. Not everyone had equal access to forests. Some peasants possessed traditional rights to gather fallen wood, while others faced restrictions imposed by local lords. As a result, people often became remarkably efficient. Nothing useful was wasted. Twigs, roots, dried vegetation, and even animal dung could serve as fuel under certain circumstances. Every bundle stored before winter represented future warmth. Food storage demanded equal attention. The abundance of harvest season could be deceptive. Fields might appear productive during late summer, but families understood that those supplies needed to last until spring. Grain was carefully stored. Vegetables were preserved. Salted meat was prepared when available. Cheese was aged. Ale was brewed. Barrels, sacks, and storage pits became lifelines against hunger. The medieval calendar encouraged long-term thinking. Winter could stretch for months. Snow, ice, and muddy roads often interrupted trade. Fresh food became scarce. A family that consumed supplies too quickly in early winter might face desperate circumstances before the season ended. As autumn deepened, households performed countless small tasks. Roofs were inspected. Gaps in walls were repaired. Doors were strengthened. Animal shelters received additional attention. Even minor improvements could reduce heat loss and improve survival. Medieval homes rarely achieved what modern people would consider warmth. The goal was not luxury. The goal was endurance. Children often participated in preparation alongside adults. From a young age, they learned the seasonal rhythms that governed daily life. They gathered kindling, helped store crops, assisted with livestock, carried water, performed small repairs. Winter preparation involved entire families. Knowledge passed naturally from one generation to the next. Grandparents shared memories. Parents taught practical skills. Children observed and learned. As November approached in many parts of Europe, the landscape entered a period of transition. Morning frost glittered across fields. Puddles hardened overnight. Breath became visible in the cold air. The first snow sometimes arrived unexpectedly. A light dusting across rooftops could transform familiar surroundings into something almost magical. Yet beauty never fully erased concern. People knew that the season's true challenges still lay ahead. For medieval villagers, winter was not an occasional inconvenience. It was an annual test. And every successful winter began with preparation. The homes in which people spent those long months varied enormously. At one end of society stood castles, manor houses, and wealthy residences. At the other stood humble cottages occupied by peasants, laborers, and small farming families. Yet regardless of social class, everyone faced the same weather. Cold winds showed little interest in status. Snow covered rich and poor alike. For the majority of medieval people, home meant a simple dwelling built from locally available materials. The exact appearance depended on geography. In some regions, timber frames dominated. Elsewhere, stone construction was more common. Walls might be made from woven branches coated with clay and straw. Roofs often consisted of thatch. Many cottages contained only one or two rooms. The heart of the home was the hearth. It served as kitchen, heater, gathering place, and social center. Nearly every important indoor activity revolved around the fire. Cooking happened there. Stories were told there. Tools were repaired there. Children played nearby. During winter evenings, family members naturally gathered around its warmth. The fire's glow provided more than heat. It provided light. Artificial lighting remained expensive and limited. Candles required resources. Oil lamps consumed valuable fuel. For many households, darkness shaped daily routines. When the sun disappeared, activity slowed considerably. The hearth became a small island of brightness within the surrounding shadows. Modern homes are designed to keep warmth inside. Medieval homes often struggled to accomplish the same task. Drafts entered through gaps in walls, doors and roofs. Smoke frequently lingered indoors. Floors could be cold and uneven. Windows, when present at all, rarely offered effective insulation. Some openings were covered with shutters. Others used oiled cloth or parchment. Glass remained costly for much of the medieval period. As a result, winter living required adaptation. People wore multiple layers indoors. They slept beneath heavy blankets. They arranged furniture strategically around heat sources. Daily life involved constant awareness of temperature. Nighttime posed particular challenges. Once the fire diminished, indoor temperatures dropped significantly. Families often shared sleeping spaces. This arrangement conserved warmth. Body heat became an important resource. Children might sleep alongside siblings. Servants shared common areas. Even animals sometimes occupied spaces close to human living quarters. To modern ears, such arrangements may sound uncomfortable. Yet they reflected practical realities. Warmth mattered. Survival mattered. Comfort was defined differently. Beds themselves varied greatly according to wealth. A wealthy household might possess substantial wooden frames, feather mattresses, and multiple blankets. Poorer families often relied on straw-filled mattresses or simple bedding, placed directly on benches or floors. Regardless of social status, winter encouraged the use of every available textile. Wool blankets, animal skins, cloaks, and spare garments all contributed to nighttime warmth. The sounds inside a medieval winter home formed a world of their own. Wood crackled in the hearths. Wind pressed against walls. Rain tapped on roofs. Animals shifted in nearby shelters. Pots simmered gently over fires. Voices remained close and intimate. Without modern machinery, the soundscape felt quieter yet richer in natural detail. People became accustomed to listening carefully. A storm approaching from a distance. A loose shutter rattling in the wind. The movement of livestock outside. These sounds carried meaning. They provided information. They shaped daily decisions. The smell of a medieval winter home would have been equally distinctive. Smoke lingered constantly. Cooking odors mixed with damp wool. Stored vegetables contributed earthy scents. Wood, straw, leather, and animals all added their own presence. Visitors immediately noticed such aromas. Residents rarely thought about them. They formed part of everyday life. Winter transformed homes into centers of productivity. Although outdoor work decreased, indoor tasks remained plentiful. Women spun wool into thread. Men repaired tools. Clothing received patches and adjustments. Food supplies required monitoring. Household equipment needed maintenance. Winter was not idle. It was simply different. The slower pace allowed activities that proved difficult during busy agricultural seasons. Skills developed around the hearth. Stories circulated. Songs were remembered. Knowledge moved from one generation to another. Long evenings created opportunities for teaching. Children learned family histories. Young adults acquired practical abilities. Elders contributed wisdom accumulated over decades. In many ways, winter strengthened social bonds within households. People spent more time together. Shared challenges encouraged cooperation. The physical closeness imposed by cold weather often reinforced emotional connections as well. Not every family enjoyed harmony, of course. Medieval people experienced disagreements, frustrations, and tensions just as modern people do. Yet winter made cooperation particularly valuable. A well-functioning household improved everyone's chances of reaching spring in good condition. Outside, the weather continued its gradual transformation. The fields rested. Trees stood bare against pale skies. Streams occasionally froze. The world beyond the cottage door became quieter. And as winter settled more firmly across the landscape, another crucial question emerged. What exactly would people eat until spring returned? Food defined winter survival, perhaps more than any other factor. A household could endure discomfort. It could tolerate cramped conditions. It could survive smoky rooms and long nights. But without sufficient food, every other problem became worse. The medieval winter table reflected months of planning. Much of what people ate during cold weather had been harvested, preserved, or prepared long before the first snow arrived. Freshness became a luxury. Preservation became essential. Grain formed the foundation of many diets. Wheat, rye, barley, oats, and other cereals appeared in different forms depending on region and social status. Bread remained central. Porridge appeared frequently. Soups and stews stretched limited ingredients into filling meals. Grain offered calories that sustained physical labor through cold months. Storage demanded constant vigilance. Moisture threatened supplies. Rodents posed risks. Spoilage could have serious consequences. Families monitored stores carefully. Each sack represented security. Each barrel represented future meals. Vegetables also played an important role. Root crops excelled in winter conditions. Turnips, carrots, parsnips, and similar vegetables could remain usable long after harvest. Cabbages appeared regularly in many regions. Onions and garlic contributed flavor and nutrition. Stored properly, these foods provided valuable variety during otherwise monotonous months. Meat occupied a complicated place in medieval diets. Popular imagination sometimes imagines endless feasts laden with roasted animals. Reality was usually more restrained. For ordinary peasants, meat often appeared less frequently than modern audiences might expect. When available, preservation techniques became crucial. Salting represented one common method. Smoking provided another. These processes extended usefulness and reduced waste. A pig slaughtered during late autumn could help support a household throughout winter. Nothing valuable was discarded lightly. Different cuts served different purposes. Bones enriched soups. Fat held significant value. Organs were consumed. Resourcefulness shaped food culture. Even wealthy households relied on preservation. Although their diets offered greater variety, fresh ingredients remained difficult to obtain during winter. Large estates maintained storage facilities stocked with grain, preserved meat, cheese, ale, and other provisions. Successful management required foresight. Winter rewarded careful preparation. Dairy products frequently appeared on medieval tables. Cheese proved especially useful. Properly aged cheeses could last for extended periods. They supplied protein and calories during seasons when other foods became scarce. Butter also played an important role where resources allowed. In many communities, daily meals remained simple. A pot suspended above the hearth might simmer for hours. Ingredients were added gradually. The resulting stew changed over time. Whatever was available contributed. Vegetables, grains, herbs, and occasional pieces of meat combined into nourishing meals. The aroma of cooking filled homes throughout the day. Bread accompanied many dishes. Its quality often reflected social position. The wealthy enjoyed finer loaves made from more refined flour. Poorer households consumed darker breads containing coarser grains. Yet across social classes, bread remained deeply important. Running out of bread could signal serious trouble. Drinks mattered too. Clean water was not always reliable. Ale frequently accompanied meals. Contrary to some popular myths, medieval people did drink water, but beverages varied according to circumstance, location, and available resources. Small ale, containing relatively low alcohol content, appeared commonly in many households. It provided hydration and calories. Winter drinking habits also reflected practical realities. Hot beverages occasionally offered comfort. Warmth itself carried value. A steaming cup near the hearth could brighten a cold evening. Seasonings varied enormously depending on wealth and geography. Local herbs enhanced flavor. Salt remained valuable. Expensive imported spices existed, particularly among wealthier classes, but ordinary people relied primarily on accessible ingredients. Their cooking emphasized practicality. Flavor mattered, but nourishment came first. Winter hunger remained a genuine concern. Even households that prepared carefully sometimes faced shortages. A poor harvest, unexpected spoilage, disease affecting livestock. Any of these events could create difficulties. The later months of winter often proved hardest. By February or early March, supplies had diminished considerably. The excitement of autumn abundance felt distant. People became increasingly aware of remaining stores. Meals might grow smaller. Ingredients might be stretched further. Communities developed various strategies to cope. Sharing occurred among relatives and neighbors. Local institutions sometimes provided assistance. Religious organizations occasionally offered support. Mutual dependence strengthened resilience. No household existed entirely alone. Food carried social meaning as well. Winter gatherings often centered around shared meals. Religious festivals included special dishes. Family celebrations brought people together around tables large or small. Even modest feasts could feel significant during long months of cold weather. The contrast between ordinary days and festive occasions became especially noticeable. A slightly richer stew, extra bread, a rare serving of meat. These small differences created memorable experiences. Children likely anticipated such occasions eagerly. Adults appreciated them too. They provided reminders that winter contained moments of joy alongside its challenges. As the season deepened and snow settled across fields and roads, medieval people continued balancing resources carefully. Every meal connected directly to preparations made months earlier. Every loaf, every bowl of soup, every piece of cheese represented foresight, labor, and experience. And beyond the walls of cottages and manor houses, winter continued spreading across the landscape, reshaping daily life in ways both obvious and subtle. The arrival of deep winter changed the rhythm of life in ways that could be felt almost everywhere. By the time the shortest days of the year arrived, much of the countryside had settled into a quieter pattern. The frantic energy of harvest season was long gone. The sounds that had once filled the fields, the calls of workers, the creaking of carts, the rustling of grain being gathered, had faded into memory. Now the dominant sounds were different. Wind moved through bare branches. Snow occasionally slid from rooftops. Animals shifted inside shelters. Some mornings began with a silence so complete that even distant footsteps seemed unusually loud. For medieval people, winter demanded patience. The season could not be rushed. There were no heated vehicles to carry people quickly from place to place. There were no brightly lit shops open late into the evening. There were no forecasts promising exactly when warmer weather would return. There was simply winter itself. Cold mornings, short afternoons, long nights, and the steady work of enduring until spring. The amount of daylight available during winter would feel surprising to many modern people. In northern regions, daylight became precious. A pale dawn might arrive late. Darkness returned early. The useful working day shrank dramatically. People adjusted accordingly. Many rose before sunrise, but activity inside the home often remained limited until enough light entered through doorways, shutters, or small windows. Artificial lighting existed, but it came at a cost. Candles required wax or tallow. Oil lamps consumed valuable resources. The average household could not afford to flood rooms with light. Instead, people became experts at using daylight efficiently. Tasks requiring good visibility were often performed during the brightest hours available. Spinning, sewing, repairing tools, preparing food, and countless other activities had to fit within the natural cycle of light and darkness. Winter evenings therefore felt very different from modern evenings. Today, darkness often changes very little about daily life. In the medieval world, darkness transformed everything. Once night arrived, movement slowed. People gathered closer together. Conversations became more important. Stories filled the hours. Many activities naturally shifted toward the hearth. The fire became a focal point around which the household revolved. Its warmth attracted everyone. Its light illuminated faces. Its crackling sounds filled pauses in conversation. Imagine entering a village cottage on a particularly cold evening. Outside, snow lies across the ground. The sky has already darkened, even though the hour is still relatively early. The air carries a sharp chill. A wooden door opens. Immediately, warmth brushes against your face. Not the steady warmth of modern heating, but the concentrated warmth of a fire burning inside a single room. The smell of wood smoke hangs in the air. A cooking pot simmers gently. Several family members sit near the hearth. One person repairs a piece of clothing. Another spins wool. Children listen quietly while an older relative tells a familiar story. The room is not brightly illuminated. Instead, it glows. Firelight flickers across walls and beams. Shadows move softly. The atmosphere feels intimate. The world beyond the door seems distant. Moments like these occurred countless times across medieval Europe. They formed the emotional heart of winter life. People depended on one another not only for practical survival, but also for companionship. Long winters could feel isolating. Social interaction helped counter that isolation. Neighbors often visited when conditions allowed. Families gathered. Communities maintained traditions that reinforced connections. Human company became another kind of warmth. Winter also transformed the experience of time itself. Without modern entertainment, hours passed differently. People paid closer attention to natural cycles. The weather mattered. The position of the sun mattered. The condition of stored food mattered. A snowfall might become the major topic of discussion for days. A storm could shape an entire week's activities. Events that seem minor to us often carried greater significance. A frozen stream, for example, could alter travel routes. Heavy snow could delay visitors. Strong winds might threaten roofs or damage structures. The weather was never merely background scenery. It actively influenced daily decisions. For children, winter often offered a mixture of challenge and excitement. Although life in the medieval world involved responsibilities from an early age, children still found opportunities for play. Snow naturally encouraged creativity. Simple games emerged. Tracks in fresh snow invited exploration. Frozen ponds attracted curiosity, though not always safely. The season brought novelty. Young people noticed changes in the landscape with particular enthusiasm. Adults, meanwhile, often viewed winter through a more practical lens. Every storm raised questions. Would livestock remain healthy? Would food supplies last? Would roads stay passable? Would the roof withstand another period of strong winds? Experience taught caution. Years of observing seasonal patterns created respect for winter's power. This respect extended to travel. A journey that might be manageable during summer could become far more difficult in winter. Roads presented constant challenges. Many medieval roads were little more than dirt tracks. Rain transformed them into mud. Freezing temperatures created hard, uneven surfaces. Snow obscured familiar routes. Ice increased danger. Travel never stopped entirely, but winter added uncertainty. Merchants still moved goods. Messengers still carried information. Pilgrims still traveled. Officials still conducted business. Yet everyone understood that winter demanded extra care. A traveler setting out on a winter morning faced numerous obstacles. Clothing provided some protection, but remaining warm for extended periods outdoors was difficult. Road conditions varied dramatically. Weather could change quickly. Shelter might be limited. The farther someone traveled from familiar communities, the greater the risks became. For this reason, many people reduced unnecessary travel during the coldest months. Villages became somewhat more inward-looking. Daily life focused increasingly on local concerns. Communities relied heavily on resources already stored nearby. The landscape itself seemed to encourage stillness. Fields rested beneath frost. Trees stood bare. Animals conserved energy. Nature appeared quieter, though beneath the surface important processes continued. Medieval people observed these seasonal changes closely. Their livelihoods depended on understanding them. Knowledge of weather, plants, animals, and seasonal timing formed part of everyday life. Many individuals possessed practical environmental awareness that modern people rarely need to develop. They noticed subtle details: the appearance of clouds, the direction of winds, changes in bird behavior, the condition of streams and ponds. Such observations could help predict coming weather. While predictions were never perfect, experience provided valuable guidance. Winter also changed the relationship between humans and animals. Livestock required special attention throughout the season. For many households, animals represented wealth, security, and future survival. Losing livestock during winter could create serious hardship. Shelter, therefore, became a priority. Barns and byres sheltered cattle. Sheep received protection where possible. Pigs were cared for carefully. Chickens required attention despite the cold. Each animal contributed to household survival in different ways. Cows provided milk. Sheep supplied wool. Chickens produced eggs. Animals also represented future opportunities for breeding, trade, and food production. Keeping them healthy mattered enormously. Winter feeding demanded planning. Pastures no longer provided sufficient grazing. Stored hay became essential. Fodder gathered months earlier now proved its value. Every bale and bundle represented preparation transformed into survival. Farmers monitored supplies carefully. The length of winter remained uncertain. Using too much feed too quickly could create problems later. Using too little risked weakening animals. Balance was crucial. Daily routines often included visits to shelters regardless of weather. Animals needed water. Health problems required attention. Structures required maintenance. Even during severe cold, responsibilities continued. Imagine a farmer stepping outside before dawn. The air bites at exposed skin. Snow crunches beneath boots. Stars still shine overhead. The village remains mostly silent. Only faint smoke rises from a few chimneys. The farmer crosses a yard toward a shelter where livestock wait. Inside, the atmosphere changes immediately. Animal breath creates warmth. The smell of hay fills the air. Cattle shift quietly. The day's work begins. Such scenes repeated themselves across countless farms throughout the medieval world. Winter survival depended on these daily acts of care. Animals relied on humans. Humans relied on animals. Their fortunes remained closely connected. Not all medieval people lived in villages, of course. Towns and cities presented their own winter experiences. Urban life differed in important ways. Population density created distinct challenges. Narrow streets sometimes became difficult to navigate after snowfall. Waste management became more complicated. Fire hazards remained a constant concern. Yet towns also offered advantages. Markets provided access to goods. Skilled craftsmen continued working. Trade networks supplied resources unavailable in isolated rural communities. Winter mornings in a medieval town could be surprisingly active. Shopkeepers prepared for customers. Artisans opened workshops. Bakers tended ovens. Laborers sought employment. Church bells marked the hours. Although daylight remained limited, economic life continued. Inside workshops, winter often became a productive season. Many crafts depended less on agricultural cycles than farming did. Blacksmiths forged tools. Cobblers repaired footwear. Weavers produced cloth. Carpenters completed indoor projects. The colder months allowed greater focus on specialized work. Apprentices learned from masters. Skills developed gradually through repetition and observation. The sounds of craftsmanship echoed through urban streets. Hammering, sawing, spinning wheels, looms operating steadily. Each sound reflected labor transformed into useful goods. Winter may have slowed certain activities, but it rarely eliminated work entirely. In fact, many people remained busy throughout the season. The nature of work simply changed. Agriculture became less dominant. Maintenance, repair, and production became more important. A broken tool repaired during winter might prove invaluable during spring planting. Clothing mended in January could remain useful for years. Time spent indoors often supported future success. This practical mindset shaped much of medieval life. Resources were valuable. Objects lasted longer because people invested effort in maintaining them. Repair was often more common than replacement. Winter created opportunities for this maintenance work. Households examined possessions carefully. Shoes received repairs. Harnesses were strengthened. Containers were patched. Furniture was adjusted. Small improvements accumulated. Each represented an investment in future stability. The season also encouraged craftsmanship within the home. Spinning wool occupied many hours. Textile production required patience and skill. A single garment represented considerable labor. Every thread began with raw material that needed processing. Winter evenings offered time for such tasks. The steady motion of spinning wheels became familiar background music in many households. Hands worked while conversations continued. Stories were told. Songs were remembered. Knowledge passed quietly between generations. Clothing itself played a central role in winter survival. Modern people often underestimate how much effort went into creating garments before industrial production. Every piece of clothing represented work. Wool had to be gathered, fibers processed, thread spun, fabric woven, garments cut and sewn. The resulting clothing was valuable. Winter wardrobes prioritized warmth above fashion. Layers mattered. Wool dominated many regions because of its practical qualities. It retained warmth even when damp. It proved durable. It could be repaired repeatedly. Cloaks offered additional protection outdoors. Hoods shielded faces from wind. Gloves or mittens appeared when available. Head coverings were especially important. People understood that significant heat escaped through exposed heads. Even indoors, many individuals wore layers during cold weather. A medieval home might provide shelter from the elements, but it rarely maintained uniformly comfortable temperatures. Clothing, therefore, functioned as a portable form of insulation. At night, garments sometimes contributed directly to bedding. Nothing useful remained idle. The wealthy enjoyed greater options. Furs provided additional warmth. Higher quality fabrics offered improved comfort. Multiple sets of clothing allowed flexibility. Yet even among elites, winter demanded practical adaptation. Cold weather affected everyone. The difference lay in resources available to respond. As winter progressed, people became increasingly aware of the calendar. Certain dates carried special meaning. Religious observances structured the season. Feast days punctuated long stretches of ordinary time. Communal celebrations provided moments of brightness amid the darkness. One of the most important periods centered around midwinter, long before modern holidays took their current forms. Medieval communities marked this season with gatherings, religious observances, meals, and traditions. The shortest days of the year held deep symbolic significance. After weeks of shrinking daylight, people could finally observe the gradual return of longer days. The change was subtle at first, barely noticeable, yet it offered hope. Winter remained far from over, but nature had begun its slow turn towards spring. This awareness carried emotional weight. People living close to seasonal cycles noticed such transitions. The return of light mattered. It suggested endurance. It promised renewal. Around hearths, in churches, and throughout villages, these ideas blended with local customs and religious beliefs. Communities found ways to celebrate despite the season's hardships. Food often played a central role. Special meals broke routine. Visitors arrived. Stories circulated. Children anticipated festivities. Adults welcomed opportunities to strengthen social bonds. These gatherings served practical purposes as well. They reinforced community connections that could prove essential during difficult times. A village that cooperated effectively stood a better chance of surviving challenges. Winter reminded people of their interdependence. No one truly faced the season alone. And as the longest nights slowly began to pass, medieval families settled deeper into the routines that would carry them through the heart of winter. The heart of winter often arrived quietly. There was rarely a single morning when everyone agreed that the season had fully settled in. Instead, it revealed itself through accumulation. One snowfall followed another. The cold lingered longer each week. Streams remained frozen instead of thawing during the afternoon. The ground hardened. Paths became difficult. The landscape slowly transformed into a world governed by winter's rules. For medieval people, January and February could feel like the longest months of the year. The excitement of seasonal festivals had often passed. The harvest remained far in the future. Spring seemed distant. The reality of winter was no longer new. It had become everyday life. And it was during this period that endurance mattered most. One of the greatest challenges was maintaining warmth day after day. A single cold night could be uncomfortable. Several months of cold weather required an entirely different mindset. Every household developed habits designed to conserve heat. Doors remained closed whenever possible. Family members gathered in the warmest parts of the home. Beds were arranged carefully. Fires were managed with remarkable attention. A medieval hearth was not simply a place where wood was burned. It was a system that required knowledge. People understood different types of fuel. They knew which wood burned slowly, which produced more heat, which created excessive smoke. Experience taught them how to keep embers alive overnight and how to revive a fire efficiently in the morning. Losing a fire entirely could create serious inconvenience. Starting again from scratch took time and effort. In some communities, neighbors occasionally shared embers when necessary. The ability to maintain fire represented a valuable skill. Children learned it from watching adults. Knowledge passed quietly from generation to generation. The fire itself influenced nearly every aspect of indoor life. Meals depended upon it. Warmth depended upon it. Light depended upon it. Even household schedules depended upon it. Imagine a winter evening after sunset. The wind outside pushes against the walls. The sky is dark. Snow rests upon the roof. Inside, the fire burns steadily. Family members sit nearby. The room beyond the reach of the flames grows cooler. Shadows gather in corners. The hearth becomes the center of the household's universe. The glow illuminates faces. The warmth draws everyone closer. Conversations drift slowly through the room. These moments repeated endlessly throughout medieval winters. Yet warmth was not distributed equally. Social class shaped nearly every aspect of winter experience. The difference between a wealthy manor and a peasant cottage could be significant. A noble family often possessed larger stores of food, better quality clothing, additional blankets, more servants to perform difficult tasks, greater access to fuel, thicker walls, larger buildings. Even so, medieval castles and manor houses were not always as comfortable as modern people imagine. Large stone structures could become surprisingly cold. Massive halls were difficult to heat. Drafts found their way through cracks and openings. High ceilings allowed warmth to rise away from occupied spaces. Residents often relied on heavy clothing, tapestries, curtains, and localized heat sources to improve comfort. A wealthy lord seated near a roaring fire certainly enjoyed advantages over a peasant farmer. But neither lived in an environment resembling modern central heating. winter remained a reality for everyone. Within noble households, winter brought its own routines. Servants worked continuously. Food stores required management. Guests arrived and departed. Accounts were kept. Repairs continued. Political matters did not disappear simply because snow covered the roads. Life at the top of society retained complexity throughout the season. Meanwhile, ordinary villagers faced concerns that were often more immediate. Would supplies last? Would livestock survive? Would illness spread through the household? Would the roof withstand another storm? These questions remained present in daily life. One particularly difficult aspect of winter involved water. Modern people rarely think about the challenge of obtaining liquid water during freezing weather. For medieval communities, it could become a serious concern. Wells sometimes froze near the surface. Streams developed thick ice. Water sources became less convenient. Collecting water often required extra labor. People adapted using practical solutions developed over generations. Ice might be broken manually. Water stored indoors might be used carefully. Households adjusted routines according to conditions. Everyday tasks became more complicated when temperatures remained below freezing. Laundry presented another challenge. Washing clothing during winter could be difficult and unpleasant. Water chilled quickly. Drying garments took longer. As a result, households often balanced cleanliness with practicality. People understood the importance of maintaining clothing, but winter conditions shaped how tasks were performed. The same applied to personal hygiene. Contrary to some popular myths, medieval people did care about cleanliness. However, their methods and opportunities differed from modern expectations. Winter weather naturally limited certain activities. Bathing practices varied by region, social class, and available resources. Warm water required effort. Fuel was valuable. Practical decisions guided daily choices. Even something as simple as opening a door involved consideration. Every opening allowed precious warmth to escape. People developed habits that reflected this reality. They moved efficiently, prepared tasks in advance, minimized unnecessary exposure to cold air. The season encouraged thoughtful use of resources. Food, fuel, light, and warmth all required management. This constant awareness shaped medieval thinking. Waste carried consequences. Efficiency mattered. Winter reinforced lessons that were already present throughout the year. Nature imposed limits. Human survival depended on respecting them. Of course, not every winter was equally severe. Historical records suggest enormous variation from year to year. Some winters remained relatively mild. Others brought exceptional cold. Certain years produced heavy snowfall. Others featured persistent rain, ice, or storms. People understood this uncertainty. Every season contained an element of unpredictability. Older villagers often compared current conditions to winters remembered from decades earlier. Stories circulated. One elder might recall a river freezing solid. Another remembered a year when snow lingered unusually late. These memories became part of community knowledge. Children listened. Young adults learned. Experience accumulated across generations. In a world without detailed meteorological records, human memory served as an important archive. Many communities preserved recollections of extraordinary winters. Such stories offered both entertainment and practical wisdom. They reminded listeners that survival was possible even during difficult years. The emotional side of winter deserves attention as well. Physical survival mattered enormously, but people also experienced the season psychologically. Long periods of darkness influenced mood. Isolation affected communities. The reduced pace of life encouraged reflection. Winter could feel peaceful. It could feel comforting, but it could also feel lonely. Medieval people responded in various ways. Religion played a major role. Faith provided structure, meaning, and hope. Church services continued throughout winter. Religious calendars offered continuity. Sacred stories reminded people of larger narratives beyond immediate hardship. The local church often stood at the center of community life. Its presence became especially important during difficult seasons. Imagine a winter morning in a small village. The air is cold enough to sting the lungs. Snow lies along the edges of the path. Smoke rises from scattered chimneys. Slowly, villagers make their way toward the church. Their cloaks are pulled tightly around them. Their boots crunch across frozen ground. The church bell rings through the still air. Its sound carries across fields and cottages. People gather. They exchange greetings. News is shared. Prayers are offered. For a time, individuals who may have spent much of the week indoors come together as a community. These gatherings provided more than religious observance. They strengthened social bonds. They reminded people that they belonged to something larger than their own household. In small communities, such connections were invaluable. News traveled through these networks. Assistance was organized through them. Friendships developed. Disputes were resolved. Winter highlighted the importance of collective life. At the same time, folk traditions remained strong in many regions. Ancient customs blended with newer religious practices. Seasonal beliefs, local legends, and community rituals persisted. Long evenings proved ideal for storytelling. Stories served many purposes. They entertained. They taught lessons. They preserved history. They transmitted values. Some tales explained natural phenomena. Others featured saints, heroes, clever villagers, or mysterious creatures said to inhabit forests and hills. Children often heard the same stories repeatedly. Yet repetition did not diminish their appeal. Each telling carried subtle variations. Different storytellers emphasized different details. Around the fire, familiar narratives became part of family identity. Imagine a grandmother seated near the hearth. Firelight dances across her face. Outside, snow drifts quietly against the walls. Children gather nearby. Adults listen while continuing their work. The story begins. Perhaps it concerns a traveler caught in a winter storm. Perhaps a saint performing an act of kindness. Perhaps a clever animal outwitting a stronger opponent. The exact details matter less than the experience itself. For an hour or two, the darkness outside feels less significant. The story creates warmth of another kind. Winter encouraged these moments. With fewer daylight tasks competing for attention, people devoted more time to oral tradition. Much of medieval culture survived through speech rather than writing. Stories, songs, prayers, and practical knowledge moved from person to person. The winter hearth functioned as an informal classroom. Children learned language, history, customs, moral lessons, practical wisdom, all through listening. Music also occupied an important place. Not every household possessed instruments, but singing required no special equipment. Songs accompanied work. Celebrations, religious observances, family gatherings. Human voices filled spaces where modern technology now dominates. The sound of communal singing during winter evenings must have been deeply comforting. A simple melody shared among family members could transform the atmosphere of a room. Music helped mark the passage of time. It connected generations. It preserved memory. The winter season also encouraged creativity. Many crafts flourished indoors. Embroidery, wood carving, basket making, spinning, weaving, repair work, decorative projects. These activities combined practicality with artistry. Even ordinary objects could contain beauty. Medieval people often decorated useful items with patterns, carvings, or symbolic designs. Winter provided time for such efforts. The results enriched daily life. A carved spoon, an embroidered sleeve, a carefully woven basket. These objects reflected pride in craftsmanship. The modern distinction between art and practical work was often less pronounced. Beauty and utility frequently existed together. As the weeks passed, however, another challenge emerged: the gradual reduction of stored supplies. This was the season when careful planning faced its greatest test. The grain stored in autumn was no longer untouched. The cheese stores had diminished. The preserved meat supplies had grown smaller. Hay reserves had been partially consumed. Every household understood these realities. A mental calculation unfolded continuously. How much remained? How long until spring? Could the supplies last? These questions became increasingly important as winter progressed. The period sometimes called the hungry gap or lean season approached in many regions. Fresh crops were still months away. Stored food had already been used for much of the winter. This interval could prove difficult even during ordinary years. During years of poor harvests, the challenge became more severe. Communities relied heavily on experience during such periods. People knew how to stretch ingredients, how to preserve remaining resources, how to support one another when circumstances required cooperation. The resilience displayed by medieval households was remarkable, not because they possessed extraordinary strength beyond modern people, but because their lives demanded constant adaptation. They developed habits, skills, and expectations suited to their environment. Winter was not an unexpected emergency. It was a predictable challenge that returned every year. Preparation formed part of the culture. Knowledge formed part of the culture. Patience formed part of the culture. And as January slowly gave way to February, medieval people continued navigating the season one day at a time. Each sunrise represented progress. Each meal represented successful preparation. Each surviving animal represented future opportunity. Each gathering around the hearth represented another evening passed safely. Outside, the fields remained silent beneath frost and snow. But beneath that stillness, both nature and humanity were quietly enduring, waiting for the first signs that winter's long hold would eventually begin to loosen. One of the most remarkable things about medieval winter life was how deeply it depended upon cooperation. Modern people often imagine survival as an individual challenge. A person gathers resources, protects themselves, and overcomes difficulties through personal effort. Medieval people certainly valued hard work and self-reliance, but winter repeatedly demonstrated that no household existed entirely on its own. Villages functioned as networks. Families depended upon neighbors. Neighbors depended upon relatives. Relatives depended upon local institutions. And all of them depended, to varying degrees, upon the wider community. This reality became especially visible during severe weather. Imagine a heavy snowfall arriving overnight. The village awakens to find pathways buried beneath drifts, doors must be cleared, animal shelters need access, water sources must be reached. A single household can perform these tasks. An entire village working together can accomplish them far more effectively. The medieval world contained countless examples of this practical cooperation. People borrowed tools, shared labor, exchanged information, helped repair damaged structures, assisted households facing particular hardship. Not every community lived in perfect harmony, of course. Disagreements existed. Conflicts occurred. Human nature has changed very little across the centuries. Yet winter often encouraged cooperation because the benefits were obvious. Helping a neighbor today increased the likelihood that someone might help you tomorrow. The survival of the community influenced the survival of the individual. This principle extended to food as well. While resources were never unlimited, many communities developed traditions of mutual assistance. Extended families frequently played an important role. A household with slightly better supplies might help relatives facing shortages. Communal baking ovens, shared grazing arrangements, and cooperative labor systems reflected broader patterns of interdependence. Life was rarely isolated. The medieval village existed as a living system. Winter made those connections easier to see. The elderly occupied a particularly important place within many communities during this season. Older individuals possessed something that could not be harvested, traded, or manufactured. Experience. They had survived previous winters, perhaps dozens of them. They remembered unusual weather patterns, successful strategies, past hardships. Their knowledge carried practical value. A grandparent might remember how a certain type of roof responded to heavy snow, how particular foods stored best, how livestock behaved before a storm. These observations accumulated over lifetimes. In a society where much knowledge was transmitted orally, elders often served as living libraries. Winter naturally created opportunities for that knowledge to be shared. Long evenings encouraged conversation. Children listened. Young adults asked questions. Stories blended with instruction. Lessons emerged naturally. A tale about a difficult winter from decades earlier might contain useful information hidden within the narrative. The educational value of these conversations should not be underestimated. Medieval people learned continuously through observation and participation. Formal schooling existed for some, but practical knowledge often developed within families and communities. Winter gatherings became classrooms without walls. A child learning how to identify weather signs. A teenager learning how to maintain tools. A young adult learning how to manage household supplies. These lessons contributed directly to future survival. The rhythm of winter also shaped relationships between generations. During summer, agricultural work often scattered people across fields and pastures. Winter brought them together indoors. Shared space encouraged interaction. A grandchild might spend hours near a grandparent while spinning wool or repairing clothing. Conversations unfolded naturally. Family histories were remembered. Local traditions were reinforced. The continuity of culture depended upon such moments. Meanwhile, outside the village, winter transformed the natural world into something both beautiful and demanding. Forests looked dramatically different. The dense greenery of summer had vanished. Branches stood exposed against pale skies. Snow settled across the landscape. Animal tracks became visible. The structure of the forest revealed itself. Medieval people knew these environments intimately. Forests supplied fuel, building materials, wild foods, hunting opportunities, shelter in certain circumstances. Yet winter altered how forests were used. Travel through wooded areas could become more difficult. Snow concealed obstacles. Cold temperatures increased risk. At the same time, winter sometimes made tracking animals easier. Fresh snow recorded movement. Hunters could follow signs that would have been invisible during other seasons. Hunting itself occupied a complicated place within medieval society. For nobles, hunting often functioned as recreation, status display, and practical food gathering all at once. For ordinary people, legal restrictions frequently limited access to game animals. The exact rules varied enormously by place and period. Still, winter hunting remained part of life in many regions. A hunter moving quietly through a snowy forest experienced a world very different from summer. Sound traveled differently. Leaves no longer rustled beneath every step. The air felt sharper. Tracks stood out clearly against white ground. The landscape appeared still, yet signs of animal life remained everywhere for those who knew how to read them. Rabbits, deer, foxes, birds, each left clues. The ability to interpret these signs reflected years of observation. Knowledge of nature formed a practical skill set that many medieval people possessed. Even those who did not hunt regularly often understood local wildlife. Animals influenced daily life in countless ways. Winter also revealed another side of the natural world. Its unpredictability. Storms could arrive suddenly. Strong winds could damage buildings. Heavy snowfall could isolate communities. Freezing rain created dangerous conditions. Medieval people respected these forces because they encountered them directly. There was little separation between human life and the environment. Weather entered daily conversations, affected schedules, influenced decisions, determined risks. A severe storm might become a community memory discussed for years afterward. Imagine a night when powerful winds sweep across the countryside. The sound begins gradually, a low murmur beyond the walls. Then it grows stronger. Branches scrape against roofs. Doors rattle. Smoke struggles to escape through openings. Family members remain close to the hearth. The fire provides reassurance. Outside, darkness and weather combine into an unseen force pressing against the household. Moments like these reminded people how vulnerable they could be. Yet they also demonstrated the importance of preparation. A strong roof, stored food, dry fuel, warm clothing. Every precaution taken during autumn now proved worthwhile. Winter rewarded foresight. Another important aspect of medieval winter involved illness. Cold weather itself does not directly create disease, but winter conditions often encouraged the spread of various ailments. People spent more time indoors. Ventilation could be limited. Nutrition sometimes declined as food stores diminished. Traveling healers, physicians, monks, herbalists, and family caregivers all played roles in maintaining health. Medical knowledge during the medieval period differed greatly from modern medicine, yet people were far from helpless. Communities accumulated practical remedies over generations. Herbal preparations were common. Certain plants were valued for specific purposes. Warm broths provided nourishment. Rest was encouraged when possible. Caregiving occupied a central role within households. Family members looked after one another. Neighbors sometimes assisted as well. The experience of illness during winter could feel particularly difficult. A sick individual faced cold weather, limited daylight, and the practical challenges of maintaining comfort. At the same time, recovery often occurred within a close social environment. People rarely suffered entirely alone. Family members remained nearby. The communal nature of medieval life shaped responses to hardship. Religious faith frequently provided emotional support during periods of illness. Prayers were offered. Saints were invoked. Pilgrimages were promised when circumstances allowed. Whether viewed through spiritual or social lenses, these practices offered comfort. They helped people endure uncertainty. Winter also influenced the experience of birth and childhood. Babies continued to be born regardless of season. Families adapted. Extra attention focused on warmth. Textiles became especially important. Mothers, grandmothers, and other experienced caregivers possessed knowledge developed through years of observation. The arrival of a child during winter brought both joy and additional responsibility. Every household member contributed where possible. The needs of infants highlighted the importance of community support. Similarly, winter affected the experience of aging. Older individuals often felt cold more intensely. Mobility could become more difficult. Snow and ice increased risks. Families frequently adjusted routines to accommodate these realities. The presence of multiple generations under one roof or within close proximity provided advantages. Support networks emerged naturally. Responsibilities were shared. Knowledge flowed in both directions. The young contributed energy. The old contributed experience. Winter reinforced these relationships. Throughout the season, religion remained deeply woven into daily life. Monasteries and convents offered fascinating examples of winter adaptation. Within monastic communities, routines continued despite weather conditions. Prayer schedules structured the day. Work remained important. Food supplies required management. Buildings required maintenance. The quiet atmosphere of winter often complemented the contemplative aspects of religious life. Imagine a monastery before dawn on a cold January morning. The surrounding countryside lies silent beneath frost. A bell sounds through the darkness. Monks rise from their beds. The air inside stone corridors feels chilly. Candles provide pools of soft light. Footsteps echo gently. The community gathers for prayer. Outside, winter dominates the landscape. Inside, familiar rhythms continue. Day after day, week after week. Such institutions often possessed significant experience in managing seasonal challenges. Their records, observations, and organizational systems contributed to local knowledge. Many monasteries maintained gardens, workshops, libraries, and agricultural operations. Winter changed these activities, but rarely halted them completely. The season encouraged reflection, reading, writing, preservation of knowledge. For those who lived within such communities, winter carried spiritual as well as practical significance. Meanwhile, in villages and towns, ordinary people continued balancing countless responsibilities. Clothing required maintenance. Food stores required monitoring. Children required care. Animals required attention. Tools required repair. Life never stopped. The tasks simply changed. And amid all this practical work, medieval people still found moments to appreciate the beauty of winter itself. It would be wrong to imagine that every snowfall inspired only concern. Many people undoubtedly noticed the season's quieter pleasures. Fresh snow reflecting moonlight. The unusual stillness after a storm. Patterns of frost upon windows and wooden surfaces. The sight of smoke rising from chimneys into clear morning air. The sound of church bells carrying across frozen fields. Humans have always responded to beauty. Medieval people were no exception. Poems, songs, religious writings, and personal observations reveal an awareness of the natural world's changing moods. Winter possessed its own character, its own atmosphere, its own forms of wonder. A traveler walking through the countryside after fresh snowfall might encounter a landscape transformed almost beyond recognition. Fields disappear beneath white blankets. Roads narrow. Trees wear delicate coverings of frost. Every sound seems softened. The world feels quieter, slower, more reflective. For people accustomed to agricultural labor and seasonal rhythms, such scenes carried deep meaning. Winter was not merely an obstacle to overcome. It was part of the larger cycle of life. A necessary season. A season of endurance, preparation, patience, and hope. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, that season was beginning to change. The days were growing longer, only by a few minutes at a time. Too little to notice immediately. Yet the change had begun. The sun lingered slightly later. Morning light arrived a little earlier. The long journey towards spring was underway, even if the cold still held the countryside firmly in its grasp. By the time winter reached its later stages, people often found themselves living between two worlds. The cold season had not yet released its grip. Snow might still cover the fields. Ice might still cling to streams and ponds. Morning frost could still turn the countryside silver. Yet subtle signs of change were beginning to appear. The transformation was so gradual that it could easily be missed. A slightly different quality of light. A bird call heard after weeks of near silence. A patch of earth emerging beside a pathway. The faint sense that the year was turning. For medieval people, these signs carried enormous significance. Unlike modern societies, which often experience relatively little seasonal disruption, medieval communities lived in constant dialogue with the natural world. The progress of the seasons shaped work, travel, food supplies, and daily expectations. The approach of spring was not merely pleasant. It represented possibility, relief, renewal, hope. But before spring could truly arrive, there remained one of winter's most difficult periods. Late winter often tested households more severely than early winter. This may seem surprising at first. After all, people entered the season with full stores and careful preparations. Yet as the months passed, those stores steadily diminished. Each loaf baked, each bundle of firewood burned, each measure of grain consumed. The reserves that had once seemed abundant gradually became smaller. By late winter, many households understood exactly how much remained. Every trip to the storage area offered a visual reminder. The barrel that was once full now stood half empty. The stack of firewood looked noticeably shorter. The hay supply required careful calculation. The season encouraged patience. There was little benefit in worrying excessively about circumstances that could not immediately be changed. People focused instead on practical decisions. How could supplies be stretched? What work could be completed indoors? Which tasks should be prepared for spring? Experience taught the value of steady effort. Medieval life rarely rewarded panic. It rewarded persistence. A farmer looking out across frozen fields in late February knew that planting season would eventually return. But knowing that spring was coming and seeing it arrive were very different things. The waiting itself formed part of the experience. Winter seemed to teach patience year after year. Nature moved according to its own schedule. Human beings adapted as best they could. One of the most important winter activities during this period involved planning for the agricultural year ahead. Although fields remained dormant, farmers were already thinking about future work. Seeds had to be protected. Tools required inspection. Animals needed to remain healthy enough for coming labor. The success of next year's harvest partly depended on decisions made during winter. Preparation never truly stopped. A broken plow repaired in February might save valuable time during spring planting. A well-maintained harness could improve efficiency later in the year. Winter created opportunities to address such tasks. Inside cottages and workshops, practical work continued steadily. Woodworkers repaired equipment. Blacksmiths maintained tools. Families mended clothing. Baskets were woven. Ropes were repaired. The quieter months supported activities that often became difficult during busier seasons. Many objects used in medieval life lasted far longer than modern possessions. Part of the reason was necessity. Part was craftsmanship. And part was the willingness to repair rather than replace. Winter encouraged this mindset. A damaged object represented a problem that could often be solved through skill and patience. People became remarkably resourceful. A torn garment might be patched repeatedly. A tool handle could be replaced. A damaged container could be reinforced. The effort invested in maintenance reflected the value of resources. Nothing useful was discarded lightly. This practical attitude extended to nearly every aspect of life. Even small scraps of material could find new purposes. Pieces of cloth became patches. Worn garments supplied material for repairs. Broken wooden items contributed fuel or raw material. Winter reinforced habits of conservation. The season made waste especially noticeable. Meanwhile, the landscape itself remained in transition. Not every day was equally cold. Periods of milder weather sometimes interrupted the winter pattern. Snow softened. Ice weakened. Paths became muddy. Then another cold spell might arrive and freeze everything once again. These fluctuations created challenges of their own. Travel conditions changed constantly. Roads that seemed manageable one day could become nearly impassable the next. Medieval roads were highly sensitive to weather. A modern paved highway functions reasonably well across a wide range of conditions. A medieval road often did not. Mud presented one of the greatest obstacles. As temperatures rose slightly, frozen ground softened. Wagons became harder to move. Animals worked more intensely. Journeys took longer. Travelers adjusted their expectations accordingly. Distance in the medieval world was experienced differently than it is today. A journey involved physical effort, uncertainty, and careful planning. Weather remained a constant factor. Merchants understood this reality well. Winter trade continued, but conditions influenced routes and schedules. Goods still moved between towns. Markets still operated. Essential supplies still circulated. Yet everyone involved accepted delays as part of life. Imagine a merchant approaching a town after several days of winter travel. The road behind him is marked by frozen ruts and patches of mud. His horse moves steadily but carefully. The sky hangs low and grey. Ahead, smoke rises from chimneys. The sight brings reassurance. Food, shelter, warmth, human company. After hours or days exposed to the elements, these simple comforts carry special meaning. Travel during winter often heightened appreciation for ordinary things. A hot meal, a dry room, a stable for animals, a place near the fire. Such comforts could transform an exhausting day. Inns played an important role for those on the road. Their quality varied enormously. Some offered relative comfort. Others provided only basic shelter. Yet even modest accommodations held value during harsh weather. Travelers gathered around common fires. News was exchanged. Stories were shared. Information spread along these routes. The medieval world sometimes appears isolated when viewed from a distance, but communication networks existed everywhere. Merchants carried news. Pilgrims carried stories. Messengers carried official information. Winter slowed these exchanges, but rarely stopped them entirely. Ideas continued moving across the landscape. Another group whose winter experiences differed somewhat from ordinary villagers were fishermen and coastal communities. Life near rivers, lakes, and coastlines followed its own seasonal rhythms. Winter transformed waterways. Ice altered access. Storms affected fishing opportunities. Changing conditions required adaptation. Communities dependent upon fishing developed specialized knowledge. They understood local weather patterns, water conditions, seasonal behavior of fish, safe and unsafe conditions. This knowledge accumulated over generations. Just as farmers understood fields, fishermen understood water. Winter demanded caution, yet it also offered opportunities in certain regions. Human survival often depended upon this ability to adapt. People observed nature carefully and adjusted their behavior accordingly. Flexibility mattered. No single strategy worked in every circumstance. Local environments shaped local solutions. Mountain communities experienced winter differently from coastal communities. Northern regions faced different challenges than southern regions. Dense forests created different conditions than open plains. The medieval world contained enormous variety. Yet despite these differences, common themes appeared everywhere. Preparation, cooperation, patience, resourcefulness. These qualities repeatedly emerged as essential elements of winter survival. Children growing up within these communities learned such lessons naturally. They observed adults managing supplies, maintaining fires, caring for animals, responding to weather, participating in seasonal traditions. Winter education often occurred through participation rather than formal instruction. A child helping carry firewood was learning. A teenager assisting with repairs was learning. A young adult managing household tasks was learning. Knowledge became embedded in daily routines. The rhythm of work itself served as a teacher. As daylight gradually increased, people's attention increasingly turned toward the future. The agricultural calendar loomed ahead. Fields would eventually require preparation. Seeds would need planting. Animals would return to pastures. Travel would become easier. Markets would grow busier. Life would expand outward once more. But winter still had lessons to teach. One of those lessons involved resilience. The word is often used today, sometimes so frequently that its meaning becomes blurred. For medieval people, resilience was rarely an abstract concept. It was visible, practical, concrete. A family that survived repeated winters demonstrated resilience. A village rebuilding after storms demonstrated resilience. A community enduring a poor harvest demonstrated resilience. The quality emerged through action. Not dramatic action, not heroic action, simply the steady continuation of necessary work despite difficulty. There is something deeply human about this pattern. Across centuries and cultures, people have responded to hardship in remarkably similar ways. They adapt, they cooperate, they learn, they persist. The medieval winter reveals these qualities clearly because the challenges were so visible. Cold weather stripped away many conveniences. Success depended upon preparation and effort. Yet it also depended upon hope. Without hope, preparation loses meaning. A farmer stores grain because he expects a future harvest. A parent teaches a child because they believe the future matters. A community repairs buildings because it expects to continue existing. Hope quietly underlies countless practical actions. Medieval people certainly experienced fear, uncertainty, and hardship. But they also possessed confidence in recurring cycles. Winter had come before. Winter had passed before. Spring had always returned. This understanding shaped expectations. Even during difficult years, the larger rhythm of the seasons provided reassurance. The landscape itself offered evidence. The sun lingered longer. Birds slowly returned. Snow melted from south-facing slopes. Water began moving more freely through streams. Change arrived gradually. Yet once it began, it became impossible to stop. Imagine standing at the edge of a village during one of these late winter afternoons. The air remains cool. The fields still show patches of snow. But sunlight feels different now. Warmer, stronger. The shadows are changing. Somewhere nearby, water drips steadily from melting ice. The sound is small, easy to overlook. Yet it announces a transformation taking place across the entire landscape. Winter is beginning to loosen its hold. For medieval people, moments like these carried emotional significance. Not because winter was universally hated. Many aspects of the season were valued, but because survival through winter represented achievement. Each household reaching this point had endured months of preparation, effort, and adaptation. Spring was not taken for granted. It was welcomed. Its arrival felt earned. And so, as the final weeks of winter unfolded, medieval communities found themselves looking both backward and forward. Backward toward the season they had survived. Forward toward the season that awaited them. The long winter evenings would soon become shorter. The hearth would remain important but less central. Fields would call people outdoors once again. The quiet season would gradually give way to activity. Yet before we leave winter behind completely, there is another side of the story worth exploring. Not merely how medieval people survived winter, but how winter shaped medieval people themselves. For after centuries of enduring cold seasons, the lessons of winter became woven deeply into culture, tradition, architecture, beliefs, and everyday habits. Winter did not simply challenge medieval society. In many ways, it helped create it. When we look back across the centuries, it is tempting to think of winter merely as a seasonal obstacle. A difficult period, a test to be endured, a chapter between harvest and spring. But for medieval people, winter was much more than that. It shaped the very structure of life. It influenced how homes were built, how communities organized themselves, how families interacted, how stories were told, how traditions developed, and even how people understood their place in the world. To understand medieval winter fully, we must move beyond the practical challenges and consider the deeper ways the season left its mark on society. One of the clearest examples can be seen in architecture. A medieval home was not designed by accident. Every feature reflected generations of experience. People built according to local conditions. They learned from successes and failures. A roof that survived many winters influenced future construction. A wall that resisted cold winds became a model for others. Knowledge accumulated slowly. The result was architecture shaped by climate as much as by culture. Imagine a village that has existed for generations. Each winter teaches lessons. A roof collapses under unusually heavy snow. Builders adapt. A particular wall orientation proves effective against prevailing winds. Future houses copy the design. A new method of storing firewood prevents moisture damage. Neighbors adopt it. Over time, winter itself becomes an architect, not through conscious planning, but through countless small acts of learning. The same process influenced clothing. Medieval garments were not simply expressions of fashion. They were solutions refined over centuries. Wool became widespread for practical reasons. Layering developed for practical reasons. Cloaks, hoods, mittens, stockings, and heavy outer garments all reflected accumulated experience. People wore what worked. Survival encouraged experimentation. Successful designs spread. Ineffective ones disappeared. The clothing worn during a cold January morning represented generations of adaptation. Every stitch carried history. Winter also shaped social expectations. In agricultural societies, cooperation often determined success. During winter, this truth became especially visible. Communities learned that isolation carried risks. Relationships mattered. Reputation mattered. Trust mattered. A helpful neighbor could make an enormous difference during difficult times. A reliable friend could provide assistance when supplies ran low. Families invested in social bonds partly because those bonds had practical value. Hospitality occupied an important place within many medieval cultures. Offering shelter, sharing food, providing assistance to travelers. These customs varied by region and circumstance, but they reflected broader ideas about community responsibility. Winter reinforced these values. Cold weather reminded people that anyone could someday need help. A traveler caught in a storm. A family facing illness. A household damaged by weather. Misfortune could affect anyone. Communities responded by creating systems of mutual support. Not perfect systems, not universal systems, but meaningful ones. Religion often strengthened these ideas. Acts of charity received encouragement. Compassion carried spiritual significance. Many people believed that helping others reflected both moral duty and religious obligation. Winter provided countless opportunities to put those beliefs into practice. The season also influenced the medieval imagination. Long nights encouraged storytelling, and stories, over time, become part of culture. Many winter tales survived because they were told repeatedly during cold evenings around the fire. Imagine those evenings. Outside, darkness arrives early. Wind brushes softly against the walls. A family gathers near the hearth. Someone begins a story. Children lean closer. Adults listen while continuing small tasks. The tale unfolds slowly. Perhaps it concerns a saint who journeys through a snowy landscape. Perhaps a clever villager who survives a difficult winter. Perhaps a mysterious traveler arriving unexpectedly at a cottage door. The details vary. The setting changes. Yet winter remains present. It provides atmosphere, challenge, meaning. Storytelling transformed long nights into shared experiences. The stories entertained, certainly, but they also taught lessons: patience, generosity, courage, wisdom. Many medieval values were reinforced through narrative. Winter created ideal conditions for these traditions to flourish. Songs emerged from the same environment. Music accompanied work throughout the year, but winter gatherings often encouraged communal singing. Voices filled spaces where darkness might otherwise feel oppressive. Songs preserved memories, recorded local history, expressed faith, celebrated seasons, marked important occasions. Many melodies passed through generations without ever being written down. People remembered them because they sang them together. Again and again, year after year. Winter provided time for memory. Modern life often moves quickly. Medieval winter moved more slowly. The pace allowed reflection, observation, conversation, the transmission of culture. Knowledge traveled not only through books, but through people. Grandparents taught grandchildren. Parents instructed children. Neighbors exchanged information. Craftsmen trained apprentices. The winter household functioned as a center of education. This educational role becomes especially interesting when we consider practical skills. Imagine a boy learning to repair a wooden tool handle, or a girl learning how to spin wool. Neither lesson takes place in a formal classroom. Instead, learning occurs through participation, observation, practice, correction, repetition. Winter provided time for such instruction. Many important skills were seasonal in nature. They required patience. They could not be rushed. The slower rhythm of winter created opportunities for mastery. The season also shaped emotional life. There is a tendency to imagine the medieval world as uniformly harsh. Certainly, hardship existed. Cold existed. Uncertainty existed. Yet winter was not solely defined by suffering. Many people likely experienced moments of genuine contentment. A warm meal after working outdoors. A successful gathering of family members. The sound of laughter around the hearth. The satisfaction of seeing food stores remain adequate. The comfort of familiar routines. Humans have always found happiness in ordinary moments. Medieval people were no different. In fact, periods of difficulty often make simple pleasures feel more meaningful. A warm fire becomes more precious during a snowstorm. A shared meal feels richer after scarcity. A reunion carries greater emotional weight after separation. Winter sharpened appreciation. It encouraged gratitude for things that might otherwise be overlooked. This appreciation extended to nature itself. Although winter could be dangerous, it could also be beautiful. Medieval writers occasionally described snowy landscapes, frozen rivers, and winter skis with clear admiration. People noticed beauty because they lived close to the natural world. They watched weather carefully, observed seasonal changes, paid attention to details. The first snowfall transformed familiar surroundings. Moonlight on fresh snow created extraordinary brightness. Frost patterns decorated surfaces with delicate designs. The natural world remained a source of wonder. Even during difficult seasons, winter also influenced perceptions of time. In the modern world, clocks dominate daily life. Schedules are precise. Activities are measured by minutes. Medieval people certainly tracked time, but seasonal rhythms often mattered more than exact hours. Winter highlighted this difference. The length of daylight shaped activity. Weather shaped activity. Agricultural cycles shaped activity. Life moved according to natural patterns. People developed patience because many things could not be hurried. Seeds grew when conditions allowed. Snow melted when temperatures rose. Spring arrived according to its own timetable. This relationship with time encouraged a different perspective. Waiting was not unusual. It was part of life. Winter, perhaps more than any other season, taught this lesson repeatedly. Patience became a practical virtue, a necessary skill, an essential habit. The experience of waiting for spring became woven into cultural memory. Many religious traditions reflected similar themes. Darkness followed by light. Hardship followed by renewal. Winter followed by spring. These cycles carried symbolic power. People saw them everywhere. In nature, in stories, in spiritual teachings. The seasons provided a framework through which many interpreted life itself. And then there were the children. Children who grew up in medieval villages encountered winter as one of the defining experiences of childhood. Their memories would have been filled with seasonal details. The smell of smoke from the hearth, the texture of wool clothing, the sound of snow beneath boots, the glow of candlelight, the taste of winter foods, the stories told during long evenings. These experiences shaped identity. A child who survived many winters gradually learned what adults already knew. Preparation matters. Community matters. Patience matters. Nature deserves respect. Such lessons rarely appeared in formal statements. They emerged naturally through experience. Generation after generation absorbed them. This process continued across centuries. Entire cultures developed around seasonal realities. Winter became part of the social fabric, part of the emotional landscape, part of the shared understanding of how life worked. And perhaps this is one of the most important insights we gain when studying medieval winter. The people of the Middle Ages were not merely victims of their environment. They were participants in an ongoing relationship with it. They observed, adapted, learned, adjusted, passed knowledge forward. Each generation inherited lessons from the previous one and added lessons of its own. Winter survival was not based on a single invention or technique. It was based on accumulated wisdom. Thousands of small practices working together. Stored food, warm clothing, strong buildings, community cooperation, Practical knowledge, seasonal traditions, religious faith, family support, each contributed something important. Remove one piece and life becomes harder. Combine them all and winter becomes survivable. Not easy, not always comfortable, but survivable. As the centuries passed, these systems evolved. New agricultural techniques appeared. Trade networks expanded. Building methods improved. Yet the fundamental challenge remained familiar. Cold weather demanded preparation, and preparation demanded knowledge. This is why winter occupies such an important place in the history of everyday life. It reveals what truly mattered. Not luxury, not status, not spectacle, but the quiet skills that allowed ordinary people to continue living year after year. The skills that rarely appear in grand historical narratives. The skills practiced by farmers, craftsmen, mothers, fathers, grandparents, children, monks, merchants, shepherds, and countless others whose names have been forgotten. Their survival depended on ordinary acts performed consistently. Gathering fuel, repairing clothing, storing grain, caring for animals, helping neighbors, maintaining hope. And through those ordinary acts, generation after generation made it through another winter. Another long season of cold winds and dark evenings. Another season beneath pale skies and drifting snow. Another season gathered around the warmth of the hearth. As winter slowly approached its end, medieval communities entered one of the most hopeful periods of the year. The transformation did not happen overnight. No bell rang to announce the season's conclusion. No single sunrise suddenly turned winter into spring. Instead, the change unfolded in countless small moments. A patch of grass appearing beside a pathway, water flowing beneath thinning ice, birdsong returning to the morning air, a slightly warmer breeze arriving from the south. Each sign seemed modest on its own. Together, they formed a message that medieval people understood very well. The hardest part of winter was passing. For people whose lives were closely tied to the land, these changes carried emotional weight. The return of spring promised opportunity. Fields would become active once again. Animals would return to pasture. Fresh food would eventually appear. Travel would become easier. The world would open outward after months of contraction. Yet before we leave winter behind entirely, it is worth spending some time inside a single medieval day. Not a day marked by extraordinary events. Not a royal feast. Not a famous battle. Just an ordinary winter day experienced by ordinary people. Because history often reveals itself most clearly through everyday life. Imagine a village somewhere in medieval Europe. The exact location matters less than the atmosphere. The year could be the 12th century, or the 13th, or perhaps the 14th. Outside, winter still grips the countryside. The sky before dawn is dark. Stars shine faintly overhead. A thin layer of frost covers the ground. Most of the village remains asleep. Only a few signs of activity appear. Smoke begins rising from one chimney. Then another. Then another. Inside a cottage, the first person awakens. Perhaps it is the father. Perhaps the mother. Either way, the day begins with the fire. The embers from the previous evening still glow faintly beneath ashes. Careful hands add kindling. A gentle breath encourages the flames. Soon the fire comes alive. Its warmth slowly spreads through the room. The transformation feels immediate. Darkness remains, cold remains, but the fire creates a center around which the day can begin. Others gradually wake. Blankets are folded. Clothing is adjusted. Children rub sleep from their eyes. The room fills with quiet movement. Breakfast is simple. Perhaps bread, perhaps porridge, perhaps leftovers from the previous day. The meal is not elaborate. Its purpose is nourishment, fuel for the work ahead. Outside, dawn slowly brightens the sky. The village emerges from darkness. Doors open. People step into the cold air. Animals require attention. Water must be collected. Wood may need replenishing. The specific tasks vary from household to household. Yet every day begins with responsibilities. Winter does not eliminate work. It merely changes its form. A farmer crosses a frozen yard toward a livestock shelter. His breath hangs in the air. The cold presses against his face. Inside the shelter, animals stir. Hay is distributed. Water is checked. Health is assessed. The routine repeats day after day. Reliability matters. Animals depend upon consistency. Elsewhere in the village, a woman begins spinning wool. The work requires patience. The motions are familiar. Hands move almost automatically after years of practice. Nearby, a child watches, learning without realizing it. Knowledge passes quietly from one generation to the next. In another cottage, someone repairs a damaged tool. Winter provides time for maintenance. The tool will be needed later, perhaps during spring planting. Repair now prevents problems in the future. The work is practical, necessary, and deeply connected to survival. As morning progresses, the village settles into its daily rhythm. Not every moment is busy. Winter contains periods of stillness. People move more deliberately. The pace differs from harvest season. There is time for conversation, time for observation, time for tasks that require attention rather than speed. Around midday, the sun reaches its highest point. Yet during winter, even this brightest moment feels subdued. The light remains pale. The shadows remain long. The warmth remains limited. Still, people appreciate daylight whenever it appears. Windows admit precious illumination. Outdoor tasks are completed while conditions allow. The afternoon passes steadily. Children assist with chores. Adults continue working. Visitors occasionally arrive. News travels from house to house. Someone has heard about conditions in a nearby town. Someone else shares information about a relative. The village remains connected through conversation. Human relationships form an important part of winter life. Isolation is reduced through interaction. As evening approaches, daylight begins fading surprisingly early. People notice. Winter teaches awareness of light. Every household understands that darkness is coming. Tasks are completed. Animals receive final attention. Doors close. Families gather indoors once more. The fire regains its position at the center of life. Supper is prepared. Perhaps a stew. Perhaps bread and cheese. Perhaps vegetables stored from autumn. The exact menu depends on available supplies. The meal may seem simple by modern standards, yet it provides warmth, comfort, familiarity. The day's work is discussed. Plans are made for tomorrow. After the meal, comes one of the most distinctive parts of medieval winter life: the evening. Today, many people spend evenings separated by screens. Different rooms, different devices, different forms of entertainment. Medieval evenings often unfolded differently. Families shared the same space, the same fire, the same light. This arrangement encouraged interaction. Stories emerge. Songs are sung. Repairs continue. Wool is spun. Tools are maintained. Children listen. Adults converse. Time passes gradually. The atmosphere is calm. The darkness outside deepens. Wind brushes against the walls. Snow may begin falling softly. Inside, warmth and companionship create a sense of security. These moments rarely appear in history books. No chronicler records them. No monument commemorates them. Yet they formed the foundation of daily life. Millions of people experienced evenings very much like these. Generation after generation. Century after century. Eventually, fatigue arrives. One by one, family members prepare for sleep. The fire is managed carefully. Enough fuel remains to preserve embers if possible. Blankets are arranged. The room grows quieter. Outside, winter continues. Stars appear overhead. The village settles into silence. And the cycle begins again the following morning. This ordinary day contains many of the themes that defined medieval winter survival. Preparation, routine, cooperation, patience, resourcefulness. Nothing dramatic, nothing extraordinary. Simply the steady performance of necessary tasks. When viewed individually, these actions seem small. Taken together, they sustained entire societies. The more we examine medieval winter, the more we discover that survival depended upon countless details. A repaired roof, a full woodpile, a healthy cow, a carefully stored sack of grain, a strong relationship with neighbors, a skill learned from parents, a story remembered from grandparents. Every detail contributed. History often focuses on kings, wars, and major events. Yet winter reminds us that the survival of ordinary people depended on something different. Daily habits, practical knowledge, community support, the quiet work of preparation. Consider how many challenges medieval people faced simultaneously. Cold weather, limited daylight, food preservation, animal care, travel difficulties, health concerns, and yet most communities endured. Year after year, generation after generation. Their success was not accidental. It reflected systems developed through long experience. Knowledge accumulated slowly. Techniques improved. Traditions persisted because they worked. Winter became a teacher. A demanding teacher, certainly, but an effective one. It taught foresight. It taught discipline. It taught cooperation. It taught respect for natural limits. These lessons shaped medieval society in profound ways. Even today, echoes of that knowledge remain. Many seasonal traditions have roots stretching back centuries. Many foods associated with winter originated as practical responses to cold weather. Many architectural features developed because earlier generations needed protection from harsh conditions. The influence of winter survives in unexpected places. As historians, we sometimes focus on what changed. And there is good reason for that. Change drives much of history, but winter encourages us to notice continuity as well. Certain human experiences remain remarkably familiar. The desire for warmth, the comfort of family, the importance of community, the satisfaction of a hot meal on a cold day, the relief that comes when difficult seasons begin to pass. These experiences connect us with people who lived hundreds of years ago. Their world was different from ours in countless ways. Yet some aspects of being human remain recognizable. A parent worrying about food supplies. A child listening to stories by the fire. Neighbors helping one another after a storm. A traveler grateful for shelter. These moments cross centuries. They remind us that history is not merely a collection of dates and events. It is the story of people. People trying to live meaningful lives within the circumstances they inherited. And winter formed an important part of those circumstances. For medieval people, winter was never simply weather. It was a season that influenced nearly every aspect of existence. Work, food, family, religion, architecture, tradition, community, memory, all were touched by its presence. And so, as spring gradually approached and the grip of winter finally weakened, medieval communities emerged from the season carrying more than relief. They carried experience, lessons learned, stories collected, skills practiced, relationships strengthened. The winter had tested them, and they had endured, just as countless generations had endured before them.